Well, earlier, I caught up with the author of Sex at Dawn, Christopher Ryan, to discuss the topic of monogamy. And I first asked him to explain just how he thought agriculture changed everything when it came to relationships.
Sure. The primary difference is the issue of property. Before people settled into agricultural societies, they were nomadic. So they were moving around, let's say 10, 15 kilometers a day, and sometimes settling for a week or two, but never settling in one place for very long. So in that sort of a situation, you don't want to have a lot of personal property because you have to schlep it around everywhere you go. So if you have a group of 50 people and you need a knife, it's much more efficient to have 2 or 3 knives that everyone shares rather than for every individual to have his own knife. So in that sort of a society, what you find is that sharing is the central motif of the society. It's the organizing principle. People share food. If you're a hunter, you're not going to get an animal every day. So some days you do, some days you don't. It makes much more sense to share whatever you do happen to catch, because other days when you don't get anything, they'll share with you. The point we make in the book is that when the central organizing principle of a society is sharing, as has been demonstrated in pre-agricultural societies, it really makes no sense to assume that sexuality is the one thing that people wouldn't share. They share childcare, they share food, they share access to the shaman, the healers, they share everything, shelter, defense against animals or other attacking animals or problems, but they wouldn't share sexuality.
What about love? I mean, where was love in that entire equation, even in this society where they shared everything?
Well, I can only hypothesize that love existed because human beings are deeply loving creatures in most cases, but I think it's fair to say that love and sex aren't essentially bonded the way we tend to bond them in Western society. So I think it's quite likely that people had long-term, uniquely intimate relationships. Maybe one man and one woman would consider themselves mates in an emotional sense. But there's no reason to think that sexual exclusivity was part of that process or part of that relationship. But the problem is that when we behave in ways that run directly against our evolved tendencies, we have health consequences. If you live on a diet that is completely different from what people were living on 10,000 years ago, you find that you'll get sick. If your exercise patterns are stray too far from what our body is evolved to do, you get sick, you get cardiovascular disease. If you have too much stress, which we're not evolved to handle chronic stress, then you get disease as well. So we can choose all sorts of things, and having free will, certainly we can choose monogamy or celibacy or any of a number of different ways to live our lives. But it's important to understand the evolved design of Homo sapiens in order to choose wisely.
What about women? I think a lot of women out there have different feelings, are much more inclined to want to be with the same person for the rest of their life and be sexually attracted to that person for the rest of their life.
I think you're right about that. I think that what makes gay couples a little easier is that because they're both coming at it from a male perspective, maybe the negotiation is a lot easier. But I think that if a man and a woman are in a couple together and they are oriented in very different ways, they have to have an honest negotiation about that. Sometimes it comes down, as you say, with a woman wanting more of a monogamous situation and the man not, but not always. A lot of times it runs the other way. So it's very difficult to say that it's always, men are always one way and women are always the other way.
You're right in that sense. It definitely depends, but I think it's definitely an interesting take on whether human beings are meant to be monogamous or not. Christopher, thanks so much for joining us.